Alcatraz was supposed to be the inescapable prison, but in 1962, 3 prisoners proved everyone wrong. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, John and Clarice, pulled off what might be the most brilliant prison break in American history. Their plan was so bold, so detailed, and so risky that even today, people still argue about whether they even made it out alive. Morris was a genius with a sky-high IQ. The Anglin brothers were experienced escape artists, and together they spent months crafting an escape so clever it felt like something out of a movie. In fact, they made a movie about it with Clint Eastwood in 1979, called Escape from Alcatraz. Using spoons they stole from the mess hall, they chipped away at the vent openings in their cells, slowly making them wide enough to crawl through. They covered their progress with painted cardboard, and only worked at night to avoid suspicion. Behind their cells was an unused utility corridor, the perfect secret passage. But breaking out of their cells was just the first step. They needed a way off the island. So they built a raft and life vests out of raincoats. Yes, raincoats. Over 50 of them, carefully stitched together using prison glue and using steam pipes to seal the seams. But they also needed to buy themselves time, too. So they made fake heads out of soap, toilet paper, and hair stolen from the prison barber. When the guards checked their beds, the prisoners looked like they were still asleep. On the night of June 11, 1962, they squeezed through their vents, climbed up onto the roof, and shimmied down the prison walls. Then they launched their raft into the icy waters of the San Francisco Bay. And then they were never seen again. The FBI searched for years. No bodies were ever found. Some believe they drowned. Others insist they survived, blending into society under new identities. The Anglin family even claimed to have received letters and photographs proving John and Clarence made it out. But the truth is, no one knows for sure. 76 men crawled through a tunnel in the dead of night, slipping under Nazi guards and barbed wire, desperately trying to reach freedom. It was one of the most daring prison breaks in history, but for most of them, it ended in tragedy. This was the Great Escape, a bold plan carried out by Allied prisoners of war in 1944. Their aim wasn't just to get away. They also wanted to disrupt Hitler's war machine by forcing Nazis to waste time and resources hunting them down. These men were locked in the Stalag Luft III, a Nazi-run POW camp designed to be escape-proof. But the prisoners were determined. They spent months digging not 1, not 2, but 3 secret tunnels, nicknamed Tom, Dick, and Harry, right under the guards' noses. They worked in shifts, using tin cans and makeshift tools to dig through the sandy soil. The tunnels had wooden support beams, electric lights, and even a ventilation system, all built using stolen materials. And to hide their work, they scattered dirt from the tunnels inside the camp so no one would notice. They also forged fake IDs, made disguises, and memorized German travel routes, all to make sure they had a real shot at freedom. On the night of March 24, 1944, the plan was set. One by one, prisoners crawled through a 336-foot tunnel leading beyond the barbed wire fence. 76 men made it out before the Nazis spotted movement and sounded the alarm. Then the Nazis hunted them down. Of the 76 POWs who escaped, only 3 reached safety. 50 of them were executed on Hitler's direct orders. 7 men walked out of a high-security Texas prison in broad daylight. They weren't ghosts, they weren't masterminds with a brilliant scheme. They were dangerous criminals who tricked the system and left a trail of destruction behind them. This was the Texas 7, a group of inmates who pulled off one of the most infamous prison escapes in American history. These men were locked up in John B. Colony Unit, a maximum security prison known for housing violent offenders. On December 13, 2000, they overpowered prison staff, took uniforms and weapons, and walked right out. They split into teams. Some distracted guards. Others took over a maintenance area. They tied up, threatened, and impersonated officers, all while making radio calls to keep everything looking normal. By the time anyone realized what had happened, the men were gone. For weeks, the Texas 7 stayed ahead of the law, traveling across country and robbing stores to survive, taking lives in the process. On Christmas Eve, they robbed a sporting goods store in Irving, Texas. Officer Avery Hawkins responded to the scene, but the escapees ambushed him, shooting him 11 times and running over him with their car. With law enforcement closing in, The Texas 7 made FBI's most wanted list, and then a tip led authorities to a Colorado RV park in January 2001. 4 were captured without a fight. 1 offed himself before being caught, and the last 2 surrendered days later. All 6 members were sentenced to capital punishment. 4 have already had their sentence carried out. The last 2 remain on death row today. 38 men overpowered guards, stole weapons, and hijacked a truck to bust out of Europe's most secure prison. This was the Maze prison escape, the biggest prison breakout in UK history, and it shook Northern Ireland to its core. Maze Prison was built like a fortress. It held Irish Republican Army, IRA, prisoners, some of the most dangerous men in the UK. The British government designed it to be escape-proof, with 10-meter-high fences, watchtowers, and heavily armed guards. But the IRA never stopped planning. On September 25, 1983, the prisoners launched their military-style escape. The plan was simple but brutal. They smuggled in firearms and waited for the right moment. They overpowered prison guards, taking their keys and uniforms. They hijacked a food delivery truck to smash through the prison gates. As the truck rolled toward the exit, some prisoners fought guards hand-to-hand, while others held hostages at gunpoint. The prison was in total chaos. In the end, 38 IRA prisoners escaped, and 1 guard did not make it out alive. 20 of the escapees were caught within days, but 18 of them vanished into IRA safe houses. Some even escaped to the US and Europe to avoid capture for decades. A mile-long tunnel, a hidden motorcycle, a $3 billion drug kingpin vanishing without a trace. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the world's most powerful drug lord, broke out of Mexico's high-security prison in 2015 in a way that left the world stunned. After being captured in 2014, El Chapo was locked up in Altiplano, Mexico's toughest prison. Guards watched him 24/7 through cameras in his cell. The government swore there was no way he could escape, but Guzman had an entire cartel at his disposal, and they had a plan. On July 11, 2015, El Chapo vanished. One moment he was in his cell, the next, gone. The truth is almost too insane to believe. Right under the prison, his men had dug a mile-long tunnel straight to his cell. The tunnel had lights, air vents, and even a motorcycle on rails to speed up his escape. El Chapo slipped into the tunnel, jumped on a bike, and disappeared into the night. By the time the guards realized what had happened, he was long gone. After 6 months on the run, Guzman was finally caught again in January 2016. This time, Mexico didn't take any chances. They extradited him to the US, where he now serves a life sentence in a supermax prison with no tunnels, no chances, and no escape. Over 100 Union soldiers trapped behind Confederate bars crawled through a tunnel with pocket knives and broken bricks. They had one shot at freedom, and they took it. Libby Prison in Richmond, Virginia was a nightmare. It held Union officers in filthy, overcrowded conditions. Prisoners starved, froze, and suffered from disease with no hope of release. But a small group of men led by Colonel Thomas Rose refused to accept their fate. They had a plan, one that would take months to pull off. The prisoners discovered a hidden basement beneath the prison. It was dark, filled with rats, and barely big enough to move, but it was their way out. Using broken bricks, old knives, and their bare hands, they dug a tunnel through the foundation. Every night for months, they worked in secret, hiding dirt in their clothes and spreading it across the prison yard. Finally, after several failed attempts and cave-ins, the tunnel was ready. On February 9, 1864, the prisoners slipped through the tunnel one by one into the streets of Richmond. 109 men escaped. 48 of them made it safely to Union territory. 59 of them were recaptured. 2 drowned trying to cross a river. Most people escape prison by digging tunnels or sneaking past guards. Pascal Payet? He used a helicopter. Not once, twice. His escapes humiliated law enforcement and forced France to change its prison security forever. Payet was serving a 30-year sentence for armed robbery and homicide. He was locked in the Loos Penitentiary, a high-security French prison, but Payet had friends on the outside, and they had a plan. On October 12, 2001, a stolen helicopter suddenly appeared over the prison. It landed right in the courtyard, where Payet jumped in and took off before guards could react. He vanished into thin air. For 2 years, police hunted him down. But Payet was doing more than just hiding. He was helping others escape too. In 2003, he organized another helicopter prison escape, rescuing 3 other inmates using the same method. Payet was caught again and sent to Grassy Prison, where officials constantly moved him between facilities to prevent another escape. But did that stop him? Not a chance. On July 14, 2007, masked gunmen hijacked a helicopter, forcing the pilot to fly to the prison and land it on the roof. In under 5 minutes, Payet climbed aboard and disappeared again. This time, French authorities had enough. After a massive manhunt, Payet was finally recaptured 3 months later. Now he's locked in one of France's most secure facilities, no contact with other prisoners, and no chance of another helicopter rescue. Over 300 Jewish prisoners made a run for freedom, overpowering Nazi guards and storming the gates of a camp built to end their lives. This escape was an act of defiance, a desperate fight for survival against one of history's greatest evils. This was the Sobibor death camp escape, one of the largest and most successful uprisings against the Nazis during World War II. Sobibor was not a prison. It was a Nazi camp in occupied Poland. Almost every prisoner sent there had their life ended within hours. But a small group of forced laborers, kept alive to run the camp, realized they only had one way out: escape or die trying. Led by Alexander Perchersky, a Soviet Jewish POW, and Leon Feldhendler, a Polish Jewish resistance leader, the prisoners knew that digging tunnels or sneaking out wouldn't work. The only way to escape was to take out the guards first. So they came up with a bold and lethal plan. 1. Lure Nazi officers into small rooms under the pretense of tailoring or boot repairs. 2. Take them out quietly with knives and axes. 3. Steal their weapons. 4. Attack the remaining guards and run for the woods. On October 14, 1943, the plan began. Over a dozen Nazi officers were eliminated, and hundreds of prisoners stormed the gates, dodging bullets and landmines as they ran toward the forest. 300 people escaped. 100 were later recaptured and executed. 50 managed to survive the war. Just weeks later, the embarrassed Nazi leadership shut down the entire camp, bulldozed the buildings, and tried to erase it from history. Tens of thousands of Union soldiers were cramped into an open-air nightmare. Hundreds of lives ending every day from starvation, disease, and exposure. The Confederate-run prison camp in Georgia had no real shelter, barely any food, and water filled with sewage. By mid-1864, Andersonville held more than 32,000 prisoners in a space designed for 10,000. Conditions were so brutal there that nearly 13,000 men didn't make it out alive. The prisoners were desperate. Escape was nearly impossible, but that didn't stop them from trying. Union soldiers dug tunnels, bribed guards, and tried to slip past the deadly deadline, a wooden barrier inside the stockade. Anyone who crossed it was shot on sight. Some of the most daring escape attempts included tunneling. Prisoners dug dozens of tunnels, sometimes working for weeks, only for their efforts to be discovered or caved in. Disguises. Some men dressed as Confederate guards or among the bodies being taken out of the camp. Bribery and trickery. Some tried bribing guards with stolen goods, while others slipped away during the chaotic prisoner transfers. One of the largest escapes happened in July 1864, when several hundred prisoners attempted a breakout. Only a handful made it to Union lines. Most escapees were recaptured or finished off by the enemy, but a lucky few reached safety and spread the truth about Andersonville's horrors. And so Andersonville became a symbol of the Civil War's brutality. 2 men locked in a maximum security prison opened 9 locked doors using homemade wooden keys and walked out to freedom. In 1979, Tim Jenkin and Stephen Lee escaped from Pretoria Central Prison in South Africa. They had been imprisoned for their anti-apartheid activism, not for violence, but for printing and distributing political pamphlets against the racist government. All 3 men were part of the African National Congress, ANC, the group fighting against apartheid, which also included Nelson Mandela. Tim Jenkin from South Africa was sentenced to 12 years for producing and spreading anti-government materials. Stephen Lee from the UK was sentenced to 8 years for the same reason. Pretoria Central Prison had 9 locked steel doors between the cells and the outside world. Since the prisoners had no access to real keys, they made their own. Jenkins carefully studied the prison's locks and stole bits of wood and plastic. He then carved replica keys by hand, testing and refining them over months. The group studied and memorized guard movements, making sure they could avoid detection. With working keys in hands, they set their escape date. On the night of December 11, 1979, the 2 men waited for the prison to quiet down. They used their homemade keys to unlock all 9 doors, moving slowly and silently through the prison. When they reached the final gate, they opened it, stepped outside, and walked away unnoticed. By morning, they had reached the safe houses, and soon after, they were out of South Africa entirely. 2 convicted murderers cut their way out of a maximum security prison, crawled through pipes, and walked right out of a heavily guarded New York facility. For 3 weeks, they evaded law enforcement, sparking one of the biggest manhunts in U.S. history. On June 6, 2015, prisoners Richard Matt and David Sweat vanished from Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York. Their escape was straight out of a movie. They used smuggled hacksaw blades to cut through their steel cell walls. They crawled through a maze of tunnels and steam pipes deep beneath the prison. They followed underground passageways to a nearby street manhole and disappeared into the night. To throw off guards, they stuffed their beds with clothes to make it look like they were asleep. Matt and Sweat didn't do it alone. Joyce Mitchell, a prison worker, had fallen for Matt and agreed to sneak them tools hidden in frozen hamburger meat. She was supposed to pick them up after they escaped, but panicked and backed out at the last minute. Without a getaway car, the 2 men were on foot deep in the woods. For 3 weeks, over 1,000 officers hunted them down across upstate New York. On June 26, police shot and ended the life of Richard Matt after he refused to surrender. 2 days later, officers spotted David Sweat near the Canadian border. He tried to run but was shot and captured. In the aftermath, multiple prison officials were fired, and Joyce Mitchell was sent to prison for helping them. Ted Bundy was a master manipulator. He charmed his victims, he tricked police, and when he was locked up for kidnapping and the worst crimes possible, he did something terrifying. He escaped. Twice. In June 1977, Bundy was being held in Aspen, Colorado, facing charges for multiple homicides. He was his own lawyer, which means he was allowed out of his cell to use the courthouse library. Big mistake. One day, while alone on the 2nd floor, Bundy jumped out of a window and ran into the mountains. He was gone for 6 days. He survived by stealing cars, breaking into cabins, and eating whatever he could find. Eventually, he was caught trying to drive a stolen car out of town. But he wasn't done yet. 6 months later, Bundy was locked up in Glenwood Springs Jail. This time, he had a long-term plan. He lost 30 pounds to fit through a hole in the ceiling. He sawed through a light fixture in his cell, sneaking into a maintenance crawl space. And on New Year's Eve 1977, while guards celebrated the holiday, Bundy climbed through the ceiling, dropped down into a closet, stole a sheriff's uniform, and walked right out the front door. No one noticed he was missing for 17 hours. After escaping, Bundy fled to Florida, where he took another life again, attacking 4 women at Florida State University, sending 2 of them to the grave. A month later, he was finally caught for good. Thank you very much for watching this video and making it to the end. If you learned something new or enjoyed the video, please leave a like. Comment down below what types of videos you'd like to see from this channel in the future. Thanks again. See you next time.